Imagine this, a cross set ablaze in the dead of night. Is that a political statement, a symbol of some kind of group identity? Or is it an unmistakable, terrifying threat of violence? Well, this single, powerful image sits right at the heart of one of the toughest questions in American law. Where exactly does free speech end and a true threat begin? You know, the First Amendment protects our right to express all sorts of ideas, even the ones that most of us find deeply offensive. But what happens when the expression itself feels like an act of terror? That's the huge dilemma the Supreme Court had to try and untangle. All right, so to really break down this conflict between expression and, well, safety, we've got to look at the landmark Supreme Court case that took this symbol on head-on. So here's the fundamental tension, right? This all came to a head back in 2003 with a case called Virginia v. Black. It forced the Supreme Court to decide if a state could flat-out ban cross-burning, or if doing that would actually violate the First Amendment. It's this huge clash between the right to speak your mind and the right to be free from fear. But, before we can even get into the legal arguments, we have to understand the symbol itself, because in the eyes of the law, its meaning wasn't just dreamed up in the abstract. Nope, it was forged in a very specific and very violent history. The law actually has a term for this kind of thing, symbolic speech. It just means that an action, like burning a flag or wearing a protest armband, can be a form of protected expression. But, and this is a big but, that protection is not absolute. The question with cross-burning is whether it crosses that line from symbolic speech into something the law calls a true threat. And what's really interesting is that the burning cross wasn't always the Klan's main symbol. The first Klan used other tactics. It was actually the 1915 silent film The Birth of a Nation that glorified the act and really cemented it in the public mind. From that point on, especially during the Civil Rights era, it became an absolutely unmistakable tool to terrorize Black families, activists, and whole communities. And let's be clear, this history isn't just someone's opinion. It's documented fact, and it's recognized by the courts. That burning cross carries with it the historical weight of lynchings, bombings, and murder. The message was crystal clear. You are not safe, and we are coming for you. So, with a history that dark as the backdrop, how on earth could the Supreme Court possibly defend this act? Well, the answer starts with a majority opinion, which was written by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Okay, so the Virginia law at the center of this case had two main parts. First, it banned burning a cross if you did it with the intent to intimidate. Simple enough. But the second part, the really tricky part, was this prima facie provision. Now that's a fancy legal term that basically meant the act of burning the cross was, all by itself, considered proof that you intended to intimidate. The burden was on you to prove that you didn't mean it as a threat. What's wild is that this case actually mashed together two totally different incidents. In one, a guy named Barry Black burned a massive cross at a KKK rally held on private property with the owner's permission. In the other, two men burned a little cross on the front lawn of their Black neighbor after they had an argument. You see the difference there, right? The court sure did. So this split led to two really powerful competing ideas on the court. On one side, you have Justice O'Connor, arguing that context is everything. A rally is just different from a private lawn. On the other, you have Justice Clarence Thomas, who argued in his dissent that the history is the context, and a burning cross is always an act of terror. Here's the core of Justice O'Connor's logic. She argued that at a political rally, even a KKK rally, a burning cross could be seen as a statement of belief, of group identity, no matter how repulsive we find it. It's aimed at the group's own members, not necessarily at a specific victim outside the group. And that is exactly why that prima facie rule was such a big problem for the majority. It was like a constitutional shortcut that just went too far. By automatically assuming intent, the law could end up punishing someone like Barry Black for what might be considered protected, though incredibly hateful, political speech at his own rally. It creates what lawyers call a chilling effect on expression. But that view was definitely not unanimous, not even close. Justice Clarence Thomas, who was the court's only African-American justice at the time, delivered a powerful and deeply personal dissent. Justice Thomas basically argued that the majority was looking at all of this in a vacuum. He said you simply cannot separate the act from its century of bloody history. In America, he argued, a burning cross isn't just an idea. It is a direct signal of impending violence. It is, in his own words, a signal of impending terror. So, for Justice Thomas, this wasn't really about symbolic speech at all. He saw it as conduct. He made the case that since the KKK is a terrorist organization, its signature tool of terror, the burning cross, should be treated as an illegal act, period, not as protected speech. The intent, he believed, is literally baked right into the symbol itself. Okay, so you've got these two powerful, completely opposing views. How did the court land? Well, the final decision was pretty nuanced. They effectively split the Virginia law right down the middle. Here's how the court basically split the difference. They ruled that yes, a state like Virginia can have a law that bans cross burning when it's done with the intent to intimidate. That part is constitutional. But, they said, the state cannot have the part of the law that says the act itself is automatic proof of that intent. That part got struck down. So what was the practical result of all this? Well, Barry Black, the KKK rally organizer, had his conviction thrown out because the jury was instructed using that unconstitutional prima facie rule. As for the other two men, the ones who burned the cross on their neighbor's lawn, well, they could still potentially be prosecuted under the part of the law that the court left standing. So this leaves us with a really critical legal standard. The bottom line is this. A state can punish someone for burning a cross as a threat, but prosecutors now have to do the work. They have to bring evidence to the table, showing a specific intent to intimidate. Things like where it was done, who it was aimed at, what was said. They can't just point to the fire and say, case closed. You know, the court's decision in Virginia v. Black didn't really end the debate. It just clarified the legal standard. But it left us, as a society, with that same enduring, difficult question. In a free country, how do we confront these powerful symbols of hate without chipping away at the very freedoms we claim to protect?